Ken Vogel is an investigative journalist who, as well as any reporter in the country, covers the confluence of money, politics, and influence. He does that now for the Washington Bureau of the New York Times. He previously reported from Politico as their founding chief investigative reporter, where in both places I think he did more than any other reporter to bring to light the corruption that the country now knows about involving Hunter Biden and Joe Biden's role in Ukraine and Burisma. But he's also uncovered many other important corruption stories as well, both in his reporting, but also as the author of several books, including his most recent, just out, Devil's Advocate, How Washington Lobbyists Get Rich, Enabling Dictators, Oligarchs, and Arms Dealers. His reporting has been all over the place, as you would expect. We've talked about it many times on the show, and we're delighted to welcome him on our show as well. Can I believe this is your debut appearance on System Update? We usually have a cake and some hors d'oeuvres when that's the case. We neglected to do so tonight, so I apologize, but it's great to see you. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
I'll cash in my chits for the cake and hors d'oeuvres later, but it's great to be with you. I'm a fan of the show, and I appreciate you having me.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, let's talk about the book. When I picked it up, I am obviously very familiar with the reporting that you do, the perspective from which you do it, the investigative techniques and targets you have. We've covered your work many times on our show before. And I wasn't sure whether this book was going to be just a rehash of the reporting that you've done, or if it was going to be not just new reporting, but also kind of a important addition to how we understand corruption. So let me ask you in your own words. There's definitely new reporting here. In fact, I would say, if you could describe that way, the main character of the book, or one of the main characters of the book, with Rudy Giuliani and Hunter Biden, is someone probably people don't know, and they will know after reading your book. We're going to talk about him in a second. But what did you see as the kind of purpose of the book beyond the daily reporting that you do?
Yeah, I mean, as you alluded to, there were a number of scandals in U.S. politics that had been emerging not from domestic money in politics, the subject of your last segment, which is sort of where my sweet spot had been for many years, but from foreign money in politics. So I'm talking about the Russia investigation, the Mueller investigation. I'm talking about Hunter Biden's work, with Burisma and other places. I'm talking about the Clinton Foundation. And so I started to look at this phenomenon and try to figure out what was going on here. And the more that I looked at these seemingly disparate stories, the more I saw a common thread, which was that in a lot of parts of the world, the developing world, the former Soviet world, parts of the Middle East and Africa, there's this sort of mindset that the way that you get what you want from government, either something positive, government assets or government funding, or something, something where you're seeking the omish, you're trying to stay out of the government's crosshairs, is to throw money at the people in power, if not the people directly in power, their family or their associates. And I think there was this conceit, certainly that I had, and I think that a lot of people in the United States have, that we're different from that. We have all these rules and laws embedded in the Constitution. There's the emoluments clause. There's these conflict of interest laws, ethics laws. We have lobbying disclosure, campaign finance disclosure that prevent that type of thing from happening. And what I found as I sort of pieced together some of these scandals and did deeper reporting was that, oh no, we very much have a system that allows for that type of mindset to play out in a real way. Certainly there's the perception among these foreign interests that they are getting something when they throw money at a Hunter Biden or a Rudy Giuliani or the Trump kids and their various crypto and real estate ventures. But it's more than that. It actually does affect the exercise of U.S. foreign policy, U.S. international trade policy, economic policy around the world in a way that makes us not so different from a lot of these other countries that I think we have a tendency to sort of look down our noses at.
The title of your book illustrates this point, but anyone who's familiar with your work already knows this, which is, the book title has both Hunter Biden and Rudy Giuliani, illustrating the fact that you are pretty much, I think, ignore who the beneficiary is or who the party prejudiced by your disclosures are in terms of Republican, Democrat, left versus right, and you really just try and do journalism as it's intended to do. And I wanted to ask about that a little bit in just a second. But I want to focus for a minute on the Trump movement, on the Trump presidency, for a lot of reasons, including the fact that it's the predominant faction now. When Donald Trump ran in 2016, he ran on this idea that D.C. is a swamp, not a Democratic or left-wing swamp, but a bipartisan swamp, that essentially it's just shaped by and governs for the people who are the moneyed interest at the expense of everybody else. That was central to his appeal, to his argument about what he wanted to change. And on top of that, you have this very aggressive nationalism that defines Trump's political identity and his political movement, to the point that, a lot of times now, even if a person who naturalized in the United States, criticizes Donald Trump, there's this reaction like, you're a foreigner. Who are you to come and tell us how our politics should be? There's very much a lot of hostility anytime, overtly foreign voices try and shape our politics, unless it's President Bukele of El Salvador, in which case we should copy him, but he's kind of like accepting that proves the rule. And so you have this nationalism combined with this, inveighing against the swamp, both of which would seem like they'd be extremely hostile to influence of foreign money, of non-American oligarchs, non-American money. And yet, every week there's a new story about the Trump family being in bed with various foreign interests, about the Trump administration, doing deals that let foreigners shape us, accepting a plane from Qatar, a multi-$100 billion plane as the new presidential plane. Do you find these two things kind of at odds or irreconcilable? And if so, what do you think explains how pervasive it continues to be?
Yeah, that's an interesting framing. I do think there's an element of tension or conflict there, but I think it can be explained by the fact that Trump was in fact an outsider. I mean, it's easy to forget now where he is, as you put it, dominating our politics, not just in the US, but globally. But when he came into office in Washington, there are a lot of, the majority of the sort of traditional power centers, the permanent professional political class in Washington had really turned up its nose at him and wanted nothing to do with him, even when he came into power. And so it created this vacuum where there were new people who maybe had been trying to establish themselves as gatekeepers and part of the swamp, who had been unable to do so, but were able to sort of get a foot in the door by virtue of their connection, sometimes quite peripheral, to Trump. And then there was also this preference that he had and continues to have to this day for people from the business world who he regarded, strangely, as not part of the swamp, even though, as we know, and as you lay out as an underlying theme of your show, there's not a whole lot of difference between the power centers in Wall Street and Washington. Now increasingly Silicon Valley, you could put into that category as well. And so Trump had relied on these people who he knew from his New York real estate days, and who he knew from his family from the beginning, to sort of exercise not just policy, help shape policy, but exercise foreign policy, U.S. Political might around the world. So I'm thinking of folks like Jared Kushner, of course, had come out of New York real estate where he had done business with the Qataris. They basically threw him a lifeline on one of his sort of landmark troubled properties, 666 Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. I'm thinking now about Steve Witkoff. And look, Witkoff and Kushner actually deserve some credit here. Kushner from the first administration negotiating the Abraham Accords, and Kushner and Witkoff this time for negotiating the Gaza-Israel ceasefire. And, yet still, there is, I think, rightfully attention on this confluence of their business interests with what they're doing. So Witkoff and Kushner were asked about this actually on 60 Minutes the other night, about the way that their work in Middle East diplomacy was implicating their private business interests. And Kushner said, look, this is a strength. We don't see this as a weakness.
It's experience. Some people call it a conflict of interest. We call it experience.
Exactly. And that's very much the Trump worldview. And here you actually see a situation where maybe it did redound to the benefit of the United States. But certainly I think it's a lot harder to argue that Trump accepting a plane from Qatar, or the bailout in Argentina, or whatever, that these other things are in the interest of the U.S. or the world. They very much do, to your question, seem sort of contrary to both the drain the swamp ethos and the America First sort of mantra that really are the underlying sort of tenets of his at least initial entry into politics.
Absolutely. Let me ask you along those lines about Rudy Giuliani, who is a major focal point of the book, I think with very good reason. It's, to me, Giuliani is such an interesting figure in this regard because he was elected to the mayoralty in New York as a Republican, a very Democratic city, elected him largely on the strength of his reputation as this kind of, hallmark and paragon of probity. He was a prosecutor, stood up to mafia and Wall Street fraudsters, somebody who just really couldn't stand corruption, would put people in jail no matter how powerful they were. That was the branding that led him to become New York mayor. And of course, he turned into a hero after 9/11. Like probably the person who benefited most from 9/11 politically was Rudy Giuliani because of how he handled it, because of his presence as New York mayor. And he had this, sterling reputation that he began to monetize very, very aggressively, became a very wealthy person as a result of that. Even so, I think it took people a while to realize it because of the buildup of this branding, that in so many ways, and I think it's part of the reason why you put his name in the title of the book, he kind of, at some point, became morphed into kind of the face of the DC swamp corruption, of having dealings with foreign influence rings or foreign leaders or foreign groups to peddle influence in Washington. What do you think happened that propelled him on that trajectory, and why do you find him such an important representation of what you're writing about?
Well, two things I think propelled him on the trajectory. Number one is like he had financial problems. He was, despite the fact that he was collecting these huge paydays from overseas, he had a very expensive lifestyle. He got embroiled in very expensive and bitter divorce proceedings with his second wife, and he was sort of out of money. And at the same time, his sort of relevance, his fame was diminishing the further and further we got from 9/11. So he's becoming sort of a marginal figure. And what happened that sort of helped reverse, at least temporarily, both those trajectories was Donald Trump, with whom he had this long relationship going back to their time together in this sort of like 1980s tabloid go-go New York milieu. And he was a very early supporter of Trump. He stuck with him even when, as I was alluding to in earlier, a lot of people turned their backs on him as he became like increasingly controversial headed into the election. And he thought that he was going to become Secretary of State. I mean, he openly campaigned for it, and he said that, similar to what Kushner and Witkoff said, he said that his experience working for sometimes these unsavory foreign regimes was actually a strength because he knew how the world worked and he was familiar with geopolitics. Well, he didn't get it, partly because some of the more legacy people around Trump, including Chris Christie, who was involved in the first transition, thought that his foreign work would actually be a liability and would prevent him from getting confirmed by the Senate. So what did he do? He sort of refashioned his role as like a shadow Secretary of State, where he continued to reap these even larger paydays because everyone around the world knew he had the ear of the president of the United States. And at the same time, he was whispering in Trump's ear about these tricky foreign policy issues that did implicate his clients or his business partners around the world. And that allowed him for a time to be both relevant and to renew his earning power. Of course, it ended disastrously even before January 6th in the way that caused legal liability for him. It backfired in the form of the first impeachment of Trump when he was whispering in Trump's ear about Ukraine, where he was doing business and trying to do business and getting Trump to exert pressure on Zelensky to try to unearth dirt about Hunter Biden and the Bidens in a way that, again, backfired spectacularly. So Rudy, I thought it was an interesting character because of his role in sort of pioneering this type of shadow foreign policy during the first Trump administration. And even now, he's still doing a little bit of it, even as he is diminished. But still, an influential character, at least during the first Trump administration, that I thought was worth putting some spotlight on.
Yeah, for me, it's just such a kind of a lesson about the endless capacity of human beings to fall prey to greed. I mean, the fact that he was so widely admired and could have built a very good life, of admiration and success based on that, but instead became so addicted to, more and more wealth and consumption as his primary source of self-esteem, to the point where he fell prey to, all the worst elements in Washington. And it kind of is a lesson about Washington as well, to the point where he's now basically fighting off a bankruptcy court and begging to keep a few of his World Series rings and maybe like a car. It's such a sad story, but kind of a testament to the swamp that Trump was talking about, but himself seems to have fallen prey to. Let me ask you about Hunter Biden, whose name is also in the title. And, as I said in the intro, I think you did probably more than any other reporter to bring to light Hunter Biden's very shady dealings with Burisma and Ukraine and just the whole, kind of smoke around Hunter Biden. I think a lot of that came from your reporting. I know you got a lot of criticism for that, especially among liberals, and their argument was basically, look, in the scheme of corruption, in the scheme of what Trump world is doing, in the scheme of how K Street works, these are very small potatoes. Like, you're talking about a $50,000 a month contract. It doesn't seem like the Ukrainians or Burisma got much out of it. They were probably paying them for influence, but by devoting so much time and energy to it, and you're still doing it by featuring it in your book, centralizing it in your book, you're giving this kind of enormous weight to a story that at the end of the day is kind of trivial. That's not my view. It's just a view that I hear expressed quite a bit for people who are angry about the reporting you did exposing the Biden family. What is your response to that? Why did you consider that a story that merited so much journalistic attention?
Yeah, well, first of all, it is true that he was not successful in some of the foreign influence campaigns that he endeavored. Some of them, by the way, he was, and I would push back a little bit on Burisma. I think Burisma at one point did kind of get what they wanted from bringing on him and the people around him. It wasn't just him. He helped recruit a PR firm and a lobbying firm that then recruited a lawyer who were successful in negotiating settlements to some of the investigations that were hanging over Burisma and the oligarch owners. So I think I know that people around Burisma do believe they got their money's worth, but it's more than that, Glenn. He was trying. It wasn't for lack of effort that the amounts that he was collecting were smaller. And by the way, they weren't that small. He made more than $10 million from foreign interests. So it's one thing for liberals to say, well, that's less than what the Trumps made, but it's certainly a significant amount of money. And also, I should say, some of the instances that we looked at, first of all, there's a pattern that I think was disturbing that I think really gets at the heart of what I write about here, which is that he was going around the world looking for clients or business partners who were in the crosshairs of the U.S. government, and not just in the crosshairs of the U.S. government, but particularly in the crosshairs of anti-corruption initiatives that were being pushed by the U.S. government and by his father specifically when his father was vice president. So, hearkening back to that mindset that I was talking about in some of these places, certainly in the post-communist world, that is something that these business partners or clients would hire him because they apply the sort of way that politics works, the pay-to-play sort of political techniques that they use in their own countries. And they think, well, look, Joe Biden and the U.S. government is coming after us for corruption. We can just hire his son and that will help us alleviate this problem. And so, whether it did or not, again, in the case of Burisma, I think that it sort of did help, but there are other cases where it might not have. It certainly was undermining the exercise of an important principle, certainly in the minds of his father, of U.S. foreign policy. And then on the amounts, I should just say that there's another example of this in Romania that I write about a good bit in the book, and that was the subject of an excerpt from the book in the New York Times, where Hunter Biden was trying to help this Romanian oligarch get out of trouble, a corrupt land deal that he was being prosecuted for. And one of the things that Hunter Biden tried to do is bring in his Chinese business partners and get them to invest $300 to $500 million in this land, and that Hunter Biden would be a partner in the resulting joint venture. So you want to sort of scoff at it's $50,000 a month or it's only $10 million overall. $500 million is not, if you swap the name like Hunter Biden for Donald Trump Jr. and put forth that fact pattern with trying to recruit the Chinese, no less, to invest $500 million in a project in Romania that, by the way, also abutted the land on which the U.S. embassy in Bucharest sat. I think liberal heads would explode everywhere.
Especially if there were documents floating around about Chinese business deals that suggested that perhaps Donald Trump himself might be a participant in the profit sharing of some of these deals that Hunter Biden was pursuing. as was the case with these laptop documents. Do you know what's made the biggest difference in my sleep lately? And it's not a rhetorical question. It's a literal question. I want you to answer that. Do you know what's made the biggest difference in my sleep lately? I see the chat. No one's answering. It's a serious question. The answer is putting my producers on Do Not Disturb. That's been the best thing I've done. Also, though, there's something else, which is my new Brooklyn bedding mattress. Honestly, I didn't realize how terrible my old mattress had gotten. I thought I really liked it. I thought it was comfortable for me, even though it was old, until I sunk into this new one. It's like my bed finally understands me. I went with their Aurora cooling model, and I'm not joking. I've never slept better. I sleep cooler. I wake up without that stiff back. Frequently find my dogs trying to come sleep on my bed as well, which they do, I confess, and they love it too. The best part, Brooklyn Bedding makes all of their products in the United States by hand. No middlemen, no gimmicks, just real quality. If you've been putting off upgrading your sleep, do yourself a favor, go to brooklynbedding.com. Use my promo code Glenn at checkout and get 30% off site-wide. That's brooklynbedding.com. Promo code Glenn. Enter our show name after checkout so they know we sent you. Trust me, your mornings will thank you as well. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.